April 2025, North Texas. While most families were settling into their evening routines, scrolling through social media, watching Netflix, or helping kids with homework, something far more sinister was unfolding in the digital shadows. In bedrooms across the region, children were being hunted, not by strangers in dark alleys, but by predators who could slip through Wi-Fi signals, gaming consoles, and chat applications to reach victims in their own homes. In a sterile command center in Dallas, FBI Special Agent R. Joseph Rothrock stared at monitors displaying a web of connections spanning 70 law enforcement agencies. For months, his team had been tracking a digital epidemic that most parents couldn't even imagine. Children, some as young as 6 months old, were being exploited by a network of predators so vast and sophisticated that it would take the largest operation in Texas history to bring them down. This is the story of Operation Soteria Shield, named after the Greek goddess of safety and deliverance. It's a tale about the invisible war being fought for the souls of our children, where the battlefield exists in pixels and code, and where heroes wear badges instead of armor. Picture this. A 13-year-old girl in Plano sits in her bedroom, playing an online game that millions of kids enjoy. A friendly voice appears in the chat, someone who seems to understand her, who compliments her gaming skills, who asks about her day. The conversation feels innocent, even flattering. She's never told that the person on the other end isn't another teenager, but a predator who has spent months perfecting the art of digital grooming. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. This was happening every single day across North Texas, multiplied by thousands of children across hundreds of platforms, gaming networks, social media apps, messaging services. All had become hunting grounds for predators who understood something that many parents didn't. Children's digital lives were largely invisible to adult supervision. By early 2025, the statistics were staggering. In North Texas alone, over 35,000 cyber tips had been reported in just 1 year. Each tip represented a child at risk, a family about to be shattered, a predator operating with impunity in the digital wilderness. The hunters had become sophisticated. They understood psychology, technology, and most importantly, they understood children better than many parents did. Plano Police Department Assistant Chief Dan Curtis had seen many disturbing cases in his career, but nothing would prepare him for what Operation Soteria Shield would reveal. Many of the children they rescued had never been reported missing. They were living in their own homes, attending school, maintaining the appearance of normal teenage lives, while being systematically exploited by predators who had weaponized trust. The predators were patient, methodical. They would spend weeks or months building relationships with their targets. They learned about the children's interests, their insecurities, their family dynamics. They positioned themselves as confidants, as the only people who truly understood what these kids were going through. Then, gradually, the requests would begin. Can you send me a photo? Just one picture, no one will ever know. If you really trust me, you'll do this. Once that first image was shared, the trap was set. The predator now had leverage. If you don't send me more, I'll show this to your parents, your friends, your school. What made this particularly heartbreaking was that many children believed they were in relationships. They thought they were loved, special, chosen. The predators were masters of emotional manipulation, creating false intimacy that felt more real to isolated teenagers than their actual relationships with family and friends. The scope of the problem demanded an unprecedented response. What began as a small initiative between Internet Crimes Against Children investigators and FBI Dallas in 2015 had grown into something that would require the coordination of over 70 Texas law enforcement agencies. The planning phase took months. Investigators had to map networks of criminals, identify victims without alerting predators, and coordinate simultaneous raids across multiple jurisdictions. A single mistake could warn the entire network, giving predators time to destroy evidence and disappear into the digital underground. The operation was named Soteria Shield for a reason. In Greek mythology, Soteria was the goddess who protected people from harm and preserved them from danger. The shield represented not just defense, but active protection. The idea that sometimes you have to go on the offensive to truly protect the innocent. The investigation methods employed during Operation Soteria Shield represented the cutting edge of cybercrime fighting. Cyber tip analysis formed the backbone of the operation. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children had been receiving reports at an alarming rate. 124 cyber tip cases in North Texas alone provided the initial intelligence web that investigators would follow. The real work happened in the digital underground, where FBI agents and local investigators conducted 73 separate chat-based undercover operations. These operations required investigators to immerse themselves in the predator's world, learning their language, understanding their methods, and gaining their trust, all while maintaining their own psychological health in an environment of constant exposure to humanity's darkest impulses. The breakthrough came when investigators realized they could use the predator's own organization against them. By mapping communication patterns and following digital money trails, they could identify the most dangerous operators and plan coordinated takedowns that would maximize the number of children rescued while minimizing the risk of evidence destruction. Among the hundreds of cases identified during the operation, 23 stood out as requiring immediate, high-risk rescue operations. These weren't cases where investigators could take time to build perfect prosecution packages. These were children in immediate danger who needed to be extracted from their situations before irreparable harm occurred. The first rescue set the tone for everything that followed. SWAT teams surrounded a suburban home in Garland at dawn, while child advocates waited in unmarked vehicles nearby. Inside, investigators knew, was a man who had been systematically abusing multiple children for years while producing and distributing content to other predators. When the door came down, they found more than they had expected. The house contained a sophisticated studio setup for producing abuse material, multiple children who had been reported missing from other states, and evidence of a network that stretched across international borders. But they also found something else. Children who had been so thoroughly manipulated and traumatized that they initially resisted rescue. Some defended their abusers, believing that they were in loving relationships. Others were too terrified to speak, convinced that worse things would happen if they cooperated with law enforcement. When Operation Soteria Shield concluded at the end of April 2025, investigators had seized 1,130 electronic devices, containing 213 terabytes of digital evidence. Each device told a story. Smartphones revealed chat histories spanning years, showing the gradual grooming and exploitation of victims. Computers contain organized libraries of abuse material, often cataloged and classified with business-like efficiency. The most disturbing discovery was the level of organization within the predator community. The seized evidence revealed that many of the arrested individuals weren't operating alone. They were part of networks that shared victims, traded material, and provided mutual support for their criminal activities. As the forensic analysis continued, it became clear that Operation Soteria Shield had only scratched the surface of a much larger problem. The evidence pointed to additional networks, more victims, and criminal enterprises operating on a scale that dwarfed anything law enforcement had encountered before. Behind every statistic from Operation Soteria Shield was a human story of suffering and survival. The 109 children rescued ranged in age from infants to teenagers, each carrying invisible wounds that would take years to heal. Many of the youngest victims had no understanding of what had been done to them. The teenagers faced a different kind of trauma. Many believed they had been in consensual relationships and struggled to understand why they were being treated as victims. Years of psychological manipulation had convinced them that their abusers loved them, that they were special, that the exploitation was normal. But perhaps the most heartbreaking cases were the children who had never been reported missing because their families never knew they were being exploited. These were children living double lives, maintaining the appearance of normal development while being systematically abused by predators who had convinced them that secrecy was protection. The 244 individuals arrested during Operation Soteria Shield came from every walk of life, shattering the myth that child predators fit any particular demographic profile. Among those arrested were teachers, coaches, religious leaders, business professionals, and even other law enforcement officers. 21 of the arrested individuals were already registered sex offenders, highlighting the persistent nature of these crimes and the failure of existing monitoring systems to prevent recidivism. The cases of Harold Lee Hill and Michael Huffman, highlighted by federal prosecutors, demonstrated the brazen nature of many predators. Hill was charged with transporting a minor victim across state lines with intent to engage in criminal sexual activity, a charge that carries a potential life sentence. Huffman's case was particularly disturbing because of his casual attitude toward his crimes. When federal agents arrived to execute a search warrant at his Fort Worth home, they found him sitting in his driveway with his laptop open, actively viewing child pornography. His admission that he had been trading illegal material for years demonstrated the normalization of criminal behavior within these networks. As the immediate aftermath of Operation Soteria Shield unfolded, one reality became painfully clear. This was not a problem that could be solved with a single operation, no matter how large or successful. The rescue of 109 children and the arrest of 244 predators represented a significant victory, but it was a battle in a war that was far from over. Even as federal and state prosecutors worked to build cases against the arrested individuals, new predators were already moving to fill the void left by those who had been captured. The digital infrastructure that enabled these crimes, social media platforms, gaming networks, messaging applications, remained largely unchanged, still providing predators with unprecedented access to potential victims. Law enforcement agencies across Texas and beyond were adapting their strategies based on lessons learned during Operation Soteria Shield. New protocols were developed for coordinating multi-agency operations. New training programs were created for investigators, and new resources were allocated to support the massive technical requirements of modern cybercrime fighting. As you read this story, thousands of children are online, gaming, chatting, sharing their lives through screens. Most of them are safe, protected by parents who understand digital risks, and by platforms that have implemented reasonable security measures. But some are not safe. Right now, predators are initiating contact with new victims, building the trust that they will later exploit, laying the psychological groundwork for crimes that will scar children for life. Operation Soteria Shield proved that these criminals can be caught, that their networks can be dismantled, and that their victims can be rescued. But it also proved something else, that the price of our connected world is eternal vigilance. The heroes of this story aren't just the law enforcement officers who work tirelessly to rescue children and arrest predators. They're also the parents who monitor their children's online activities without violating their privacy, the teachers who recognize signs of exploitation and report them, and the technology professionals who design systems with child safety as a priority rather than an afterthought. The digital age has given us unprecedented opportunities for learning, creativity, and connection. But it has also created new vulnerabilities that require new forms of protection. The children rescued during Operation Soteria Shield deserve a future where technology serves to enhance their lives rather than endanger them. That future is possible, but only if we remain vigilant. Only if we continue to adapt our defenses as quickly as predators adapt their methods, and only if we remember that behind every statistic is a child who deserves to grow up safe, protected, and free from exploitation. The war for our children's digital safety continues. Operation Soteria Shield was a victory, but it was not the end. It was a reminder that in the connected world, protection is not a destination, it's a journey that requires the constant dedication of everyone who believes that children deserve to inherit a digital world worthy of their dreams.